It started like any ordinary day at a construction site. Hard hats, heavy machinery, and the usual hustle of the crew. But that calm didn't last long. Out of nowhere, a group of loud bikers rolled in, revving their engines and drawing attention. They weren't there for work. They weren't there to help. They were looking for trouble. What they didn't know, though, was that this wasn't just any construction site. Among the crew was a quiet but commanding figure, a veteran with a no-nonsense attitude, and a past that taught him never to back down. At first, he kept his cool, watching as the bikers tried to intimidate the workers. But when they crossed the line, they got more than they bargained for. What happened next left everyone speechless. Stay tuned to find out how one veteran showed these bikers the meaning of real strength and respect. The veteran, known to his crew as Mike, had spent years serving his country. He didn't talk much about his past, but there was something about his calm demeanor and sharp gaze that commanded respect. He was the kind of guy who didn't need to say much to make a point. But that quiet strength was about to be tested. The bikers, a rowdy group who seemed more interested in showing off than anything else, started throwing insults and making crude jokes. At first, the construction crew tried to ignore them, focusing on their work. But the bikers weren't backing off. They started revving their engines louder, kicking up dust, and knocking over equipment. Mike stood off to the side, watching, his expression unreadable. The crew wondered what he was thinking, but no one dared to ask. Then one biker stepped too close, and Mike slowly stepped forward. The crew froze as Mike approached the biker. There was a quiet intensity in his steps, each one deliberate, as if he was calculating his next move. The biker, tall and broad-shouldered, gave a smug grin, clearly not taking Mike seriously. "What are you gonna do, old man?" he taunted, his voice dripping with mockery. His buddies laughed, egging him on. But Mike didn't flinch. He simply looked the biker in the eye and said, "You're trespassing. This is private property. Leave now and we won't have a problem." His tone was steady, almost too calm. That only seemed to fire up the bikers more. "Or what?" Another one chimed in, stepping off his bike. The crew exchanged nervous glances, unsure how far this would go. Meanwhile, Mike remained unmoved, his stance unshaken. There was something in his eyes, a quiet warning that most people would have heeded. But these bikers weren't most people. The air was thick with tension as the bikers circled closer, their laughter echoing across the site. Tools lay abandoned, the crew unsure whether to step in or stay back. Mike stood his ground, his eyes locked on the group's leader, the one who had mocked him moments before. The man smirked, clearly underestimating the veteran in front of him. "You're not gonna do anything," the biker said, stepping forward until he was almost nose to nose with Mike. "Guys like you talk big, but it's all bark, no bite." Mike tilted his head slightly, his expression unreadable, but there was a flicker of something in his eyes. "You're making a mistake," he said, his voice low and calm. The leader laughed, shoving Mike backward. The crew gasped, but Mike didn't stumble. Instead, he straightened, his posture changing ever so slightly. It wasn't loud or aggressive, but it sent a clear message. Things were about to escalate. The silence that followed the shove was deafening. The crew stood frozen, waiting to see what Mike would do. But instead of reacting, he took a step back, his hands at his sides, as if giving the biker one last chance to walk away. "This isn't the fight you want," Mike said evenly, his voice carrying just enough authority to make the leader hesitate. But the hesitation didn't last long. The biker, clearly eager to prove himself in front of his crew, smirked and cracked his knuckles. "You don't scare me, old man," he sneered, taking a swing. It happened so fast that most of the crew didn't even see it. Mike sidestepped with precision, his military instincts kicking in. The biker stumbled forward, caught off guard, and before he could recover, Mike was in control, firmly disarming the situation without throwing a single punch. But just as it seemed things were under control, the rumble of more engines filled the air. A second group of bikers rolled onto the site, clearly friends of the first crew. The leader smirked as reinforcements arrived, while the crew exchanged uneasy glances. The tension was thicker than ever. Mike didn't move, his calm exterior unshaken, but the stakes had just risen, and everyone could feel it. The second wave of bikers brought a wave of unease across the site. Their engines roared, and their presence seemed to embolden the leader, who now grinned smugly at Mike. "Guess the odds aren't in your favor anymore," he said, crossing his arms. The crew shifted nervously, clearly outnumbered and unsure if this would spiral out of control. But Mike remained calm, his eyes scanning the scene. Then, with a calmness that made everyone uneasy, he reached into his back pocket, not for a weapon, but for his phone. Without saying a word, he dialed a number. "Yeah, it's me," he said into the receiver. "You might want to send some units down to the site. We've got a bit of a situation." The bikers laughed, mocking him for calling the police, but what happened next wiped the smirks off their faces. Within minutes, the distant sound of sirens filled the air. The bikers froze, realizing too late that Mike had not only outmaneuvered them physically, but outsmarted them entirely. As the police arrived, the bikers scrambled to leave, but there was no escape. Officers quickly surrounded the area, taking control of the situation. The leader glared at Mike, his bravado gone. "Who even are you?" he asked, his voice laced with disbelief. Mike didn't answer right away. Instead, he turned to his crew, ensuring they were safe before glancing back at the biker. "Just a guy who knows how to handle trouble," he said, his tone as steady as ever. As the police escorted the bikers away, the crew erupted into cheers, their respect for Mike reaching new heights. But as the dust settled, one of the workers approached him and asked, "How'd you stay so calm through all that?" Mike smiled faintly, the hint of a story in his eyes. "When you've been through worse, you learn to pick your battles," he said. And with that, he returned to work, leaving the crew in awe of the veteran who turned the tables with nothing but his wit, experience, and unshakable resolve. As the dust settled and the police cars disappeared into the distance, the construction site returned to a cautious calm. The crew began picking up their tools and resetting equipment, still buzzing about what had just unfolded. For many of them, it wasn't just about how Mike had handled the bikers. It was the way he'd done it, with a level head and quiet strength that inspired respect. One of the younger workers approached him, still wide-eyed. "I don't know how you kept your cool, Mike. I thought those guys were gonna tear this place apart." Mike looked at him with a small, knowing smile. "Trouble only wins if you let it," he said simply. "Sometimes the best way to fight is to not fight at all." The crew nodded, taking his words to heart. And as the day carried on, they couldn't help but feel a little prouder to work alongside the veteran who turned a chaotic moment into a lesson in composure and courage.